Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past and life's just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone.
My guest today is Iris Kelts. She was born in New York City, raised on the narrative of Jewish suffering in a diaspora lasting thousands of years, culminating in the Nazi Holocaust. Israel's victory in 1967 should have been a jubilant moment. Known as the Six-Day War, Israel conquered the West Bank, the Golan Heights, Gaza, and the Sinai Peninsula. Kelts arrived in East Jerusalem, Jordan then, in the spring of 1967, hoping to live on a kibbutz. While waiting for a permit to cross the UN checkpoint into West Jerusalem, Israel, Iris met a handsome young Palestinian poet, musician, world traveler. After a whirlwind courtship of less than 3 weeks, that's almost a record, maybe, they married and were planning their honeymoon when the war broke out. The day Israeli soldiers barged into the Ramallah apartment where the newlyweds had found sanctuary with other Palestinians, Iris froze with fear. She meant to cry out, "I'm Jewish, American, and these are my friends." Her silence that day compelled her to write this book, Unexpected Bride in the Promised Land, Journeys in Palestine and Israel, which the book includes a foreword by Miko Peled, who credits Iris for inspiring his activism. So, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and this is a subject I've been talking about since 1967, and I want to say the picture on the cover is a little village outside of the old city of Jerusalem. It's Abu Dis, and that was the day that I got married to Faisal.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
and I'm standing between Faisal, we had just gotten married, and his father is right there. And this, the man wearing the keffiyeh on his head, he was the court translator to make sure that I understood what I was doing, because he spoke English and Arabic, and that was his wife. So that was, we had just come from the court. So that's a historical photograph.
Now, did your new husband speak any English?
He was really amazing with languages. He was just starting to learn English. He spoke broken English.
I see.
But enough to communicate.
Right.
But his father, who's in this picture, had been in service during the British Mandate and worked for the British and was a
so
policeman.
he knew English.
He was fluent in English and Arabic, you know. And so his father and his mother was a nurse, head nurse in a midwifery hospital in East Jerusalem, very educated, and spoke fluent English. And his sister, who's not in this picture, his sister Samira, had just come back from Miami University, where she had studied journalism and was a writer. And she was the same age as me, and we became really good friends. And his brother worked in Barclays Bank and spoke fluent English. So Faisal was the only one in the family who wasn't fluent in English. You know, so I ended up in an amazing family. It was just.
And he's still living, right?
Yes, and we are in touch. And we divorced we were married 4 years or 5 years, but we stayed in touch forever.
Wonderful.
And we're still
Wonderful.
friends, and we talk. And the caveat of all that, which is amazing, is about 3 years ago, one of Faisal's sons had read this book and wanted to meet me, and is now living in Albuquerque.
Really? Oh my.
And calls me Umpty. And
Wow.
he's like my family, and I introduce him as my spirit son.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and
Umpty, how did you come up with that?
well, that's like auntie. Because Faisal had an Umpty that was living in the house too, and I loved Umpty. So he calls me Umpty Iris.
Wonderful.
That's a nice name.
Oh, yeah.
I love that name, Umpty Iris.
And are his brother and sister still living or no?
Samira unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. Very sad. I was really good friends with her, and
his brother?
And his brother Marwan lives in Egypt now, and so nobody in the family is left in Jerusalem.
I see.
None of the family. None of the family.
And of course his parents died years ago, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But I just want to say one thing about Miko Peled. Miko Peled wrote a book called The General's Son, which was like one of the generals who fought in 1948 to create the State of Israel. And he was one of the signatories on the Israeli document of independence. It was like Thomas Jefferson to us or something.
Right.
And I met him, and he told me this story about who his father was, and he thought like me that Palestinian rights were equal to Jewish rights, and we talked, and I told him my story, and he has become a world-renowned activist since then.
Wonderful.
He travels around the world telling people Israeli human rights are equal to Jewish human rights, and the truth of what's happening in the land there of Israel, Palestine. That's what I call it.
Wonderful. And was his father still living when he took his stand for the rights of the Palestinians?
No, his father was not. But one of the things that's interesting about the Palestinians was how I met them, because I was just young, 19, and I wanted to go live on a kibbutz. I'm Jewish, so I was told...
Explain what a kibbutz is. A lot of people wouldn't know.
Okay, a kibbutz is, they had these communal farms where you could just go and work on the farm. And I was invited by a friend of mine who I had met briefly, a South African Jew who was on a kibbutz harvesting oranges. And you just went there and you worked as a day laborer on the farm, and then you got a place to live and food, and you met other young people from around the world.
Right.
So I was told that if you're Jewish, well, they'll take you in. So I was on my way to go live on a kibbutz, but I started in Paris, where I had been living because I wanted to be a writer. That's where you start off, right? And so I hitchhiked from Paris to Jerusalem around the basin of the Mediterranean.
Really? Oh.
And so that's why I entered Jerusalem through Jordan. That's why I did not fly into Tel Aviv. That's why I entered through the unusual way, which is what created this whole life change for me. And so when I got to East Jerusalem, I did not even know that there was East Jerusalem, Jordan, and West Jerusalem, Israel. I really didn't.
No, I think most of us
in 1967
wouldn't have known that either.
And
now.
In between, there was a swath of land called No Man's Land.
Between the two parts of Jerusalem?
Yes, it was a divided city, kind of like you think of Berlin, but this was just this huge swath of land, and it was called No Man's Land because you'd be killed if you went in there. So I had to wait, in order for me to go into West Jerusalem, Israel, I had to wait, get a visa and go in with a United Nations delegation. They had to cross safely over into West Jerusalem, Israel. So I had to wait, I forget how many days. So while and so there was a youth hostel right on the border between East and West Jerusalem. So I checked into the youth hostel and then went exploring into the old city of Jerusalem. I didn't even realize that that was like the place, because it wasn't Israel, it was Jordan.
Right.
So I went into the old city and I ended up meeting a Palestinian family who offered to host me. They welcomed me, they offered me food. And what was interesting to me is I had never heard the word Palestinian growing up.
Really?
Never. It was never used. They were called those Arabs who hate us and want to drive us into the sea.
Oh my.
So there I am sitting with this Palestinian family and they're feeding me incredible food, and Faisal was a great musician. He was playing oud and music. I was having a great time.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, oh, we're the big bad Palestinians. And I thought, well, I never heard of that tribe. That sounds exotic to me.
Oh, you thought it was a Jewish tribe?
No, I just thought it was exotic.
I see. Yeah.
Just like I was like open to experiencing new things.
Wonderful.
Maybe if I'd heard that word, maybe I would have been afraid. I don't know.
Right.
But I wasn't. And I told them I was Jewish and on my way to go live on a kibbutz in Israel, and I was waiting. I told them, you know, the truth. And they said, well, while you're here, we want to show you around and take you places.
Oh.
And the first place they insisted on taking me to was the Wailing Wall.
And explain.
And the Wailing Wall is one of the most sacred sites for Jews. And it's supposedly the last remaining wall of the Temple of Solomon, which has yet to be found.
Really?
But, yeah. But what the Wailing Wall actually is, it's a holding wall, what you call it, holding up the Temple Mount. It's a foundational wall. And there are two mosques up on top of the Temple Mount, and they are searching for the Temple of Solomon, which they have not found yet.
Huh.
And so there's the Dome of the Rock up there, which is pretty well known. That's the one that has the gold dome. That's an iconic picture of Jerusalem, and Al-Aqsa Mosque up there. So Jews have always wanted to go pray by the Wailing Wall, the last remaining wall, supposedly, of the Temple of Solomon. But what was interesting is, so they took me to the Wailing Wall, and I said, well, you know, I'm not real religious. They said, okay, you're Jewish. You have to go to the Wailing Wall. You have to go pray by. They insisted on taking me. So I went, and I did say a prayer, and did put my head against the wall. And what I didn't realize was it was embedded in an old Moroccan neighborhood that was founded by Saladin, someone in his family, and it was an old area, and it was like a wide alleyway. Because now when you go see the Wailing Wall, it's this huge, like, open arena. Well, that was the Moroccan quarter, the Maghreb quarter, which was destroyed during the Six-Day War to make way for this open-air synagogue. And so that the Moroccan quarter was destroyed during the Six-Day War. And so when I went back, it took me a long time to go back after the Six-Day War. That was 67. I didn't go back till 98.
31 years later.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't, you know, I was divorced from Faisal. None of his family was there. We were good friends. And I couldn't go back as a Jewish tourist. I did not know how to return gracefully as who I was, which is, I'm Jewish, but I was part of a Palestinian family. I was with them during the Six-Day War. And then I heard about a village in Israel called Neve Shalom Wahat al-Salam, which means the oasis of peace in English. And it is the only integrated village in the entire country.
Really?
Where Jews and Muslims and Christians live together in peace.
Wonderful.
And they don't have any synagogues or mosques there. They have a place called the Dumia, which is the place of silence. You just go in there and you could meditate and say your own prayers in silence. And they were sponsoring a tour, and I said, okay, I could go back and stay in the Oasis of Peace and, you know, check in and see what's happened.
About how many people live in that town?
It's a village, and I have no idea. It's small. I don't know what it's like now, but I loved it. It was very like pastoral and quaint, and you could just walk along the roads and beautiful houses and bougainvilleas dripping everywhere. And I went into, they have an elementary school where Palestinian and Israeli Jewish kids went. And I remember standing and looking at the kids playing in the sandbox. And one of the things they were playing with was like gas helmets that had been left over from some war, that if you needed to put on a gas helmet if they were worried about gases. And but they used them like pails to put sand in and stuff. And so I was looking at these kids and going, I could not tell who was Palestinian and who was Jewish, except sometimes if there was a fair kid, you say, okay, that must be from like German Jewish background. But a lot of the Jews come from North Africa and Spain, Mizrahi and Sephardic, and they don't look any different than the Palestinians. So I was like right half the time and wrong half the time. Really, you couldn't tell. And the kids were just all playing in the sandbox.
Wonderful.
And that is an ideal
Yes.
that I hold in my head and in my heart.
Do you think most people in Israel know about that village?
Yeah, oh yes.
Has it received much publicity, you think, in the newspapers or TV, or is
I don't know. But you know, beyond that, that's a village where everybody lives together. There's a group of schools in Israel called the Hand-in-Hand schools, where they have bilingual, bicultural curriculum.
Really?
And they have Palestinians and Israeli Jews going to the same school. Now, to me, that is the solution, really, because there you have children, they're studying each other's narrative, they're learning each other's history, language, culture, etc. One of the problems with those schools is it is not funded and backed by the government. They have to fundraise. It's private. So it's not promoted by the government at all, and it should be. If Israel was serious about peaceful coexistence, they're called the Hand-in-Hand schools. You could look them up, and you could look up the Oasis of Peace. Both
About
of those.
how many hand-in-hand schools do you think there are in Israel?
I don't know, 4 or 5. I know there's one down in Beersheba. There's one up in the Galilee. There's one in Jerusalem. I'm not sure if there's more than I did visit those 3. I visited 3 of them. So.
And do you think any right-wingers in Israel tries to threaten those schools or harm them?
Well, I think it would be really the way, you know, to me, the tragedy of being an eyewitness to that war is I was living in Jerusalem before the occupation descended on Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. And I was one of the first people to cross no man's land without the United Nations delegation and walk over to West Jerusalem, Israel. And one of the tragedies that I'll hold in my heart forever is that the Palestinians, Israel was 19 years old at the time. That was all. Now it's, we're the same age. Israel and I are the same age.
Oh my.
Now, there's been, at that point when it was 19, the Palestinians, the first thing they said, and I was living in the Palestinian community. It wasn't like I was visiting or interviewing or a journalist or whatever. They said, we're home. Because Israel and Palestine are the same place. They are the same place. And if Israel had given citizenship and equal rights to the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, because they conquered the West Bank and Gaza, The Sinai Desert got returned to Egypt. They conquered that too. And also the Golan Heights, which they've annexed. And all this is against international law. Israel could have actually had it all without anybody dying.
Right.
Without
right.
anybody being killed, without the land being destroyed. But they couldn't. They had this fear that I didn't have, because
Right.
I didn't know the word Palestinian. And you know, growing up, I never heard of the Nakba. Never.
Yeah. And explain the Nakba.
Okay, the Nakba is how Israel was created. Now, I was growing up and cheering on how Israel was created at the United Nations in 1948. I did not know the cost of that was the destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages, and over 750,000 Palestinians went into their diaspora. I just knew about the Jewish diaspora.
Right.
I didn't know about the Palestinian.
But say that again,
Diaspora.
because I think many people who see this program certainly haven't heard about.
The Nakba?
No, and the terrible conditions that Israel caused these villages. How many villages were?
Over 500.
Over 500 Palestinian villages.
And the 1967 war that I was witness to is called the Naksa, which means, Nakba translates from Arabic as the catastrophe.
The catastrophe.
And Naksa is not as great a catastrophe as what happened in 48, but what's happening now in Gaza
Right.
equals or surpasses the Nakba in
Right.
1948. And there's still no resolution. And I am here to say the solution is simple. And you know, my mother, my Jewish mother, who
Yeah.
wanted me to marry a Jewish doctor, she welcomed Faisal's family and
Wonderful.
Faisal with open arms.
Wonderful.
She was so welcoming, and she loved them.
Huh.
And she,
Did they visit her in New York, or she visited?
well,
in-
Faisal moved to New York City, which is my home, and we lived together in New York for a number of years. But my mother also made her first trip to Israel to have her bat mitzvah when she was 70.
70, really?
Well, because when she was young, girls didn't have a bat mitzvah.
Oh, okay.
So she went, and I said, Mom, would you visit Faisal's mom? And she goes, sure, sure. So she went on a Hadassah tour. I love this story. So she leaves her tour with her friend Ida Mincer, her girlfriend, and they get on one of the Palestinian buses, which are much more rickety than the
Right.
Israeli Egged buses. And she gets on the bus, and she tells the bus driver she's going to go visit Yusra Khatib. So the bus driver diverts from his route, takes her to the door of Yusra's house,
Oh.
where she was welcomed.
Wonderful.
And Faisal's mother, who was a nurse in the midwifery hospital, made sure they had a kosher meal.
Huh.
She understood all about kosher.
Really?
Put them up for the night, and she went to work because she was working all night as a nurse. And Samira was living at home, so Samira was with them. She came home in the morning and gave them a tour of Jerusalem that, let me tell you, Hadassah could never have given.
Right, right.
She took them up to the Temple Mount, took them into the mosques. She even took them into one of the refugee camps in the old. She took them everywhere and just treated them royally. And then she took them, you know, back to the Egged bus so they could rejoin their Hadassah tour. And my mother said that was like the best part of her tour.
Wonderful.
And I said to my mother, Mom, did you tell the people on your Hadassah tour where you had just been?
Uh-huh.
And she said, oh, no, it was none of their business.
Oh.
But I felt she was afraid to tell them, or a
Yes.
little
Oh,
ashamed,
yes.
or didn't
yes.
want them to know. She had just like crossed the line
That's
into
right.
so-called enemy territory.
That's right.
And she did not, unlike me, couldn't say, they're not my enemy.
Right.
But before she died, and she died last year at 108 years old.
Really? 108?
108,
Oh, my.
the number of completion.
Oh.
And she said, I just don't understand why we can't share the place.
Oh,
So the solution
Yeah.
really boils down to
Yeah.
one word. It's not complicated. The
Right.
word is share.
yes, yes,
But-
yes.
Going back to what I said before, Israel couldn't extend citizenship and equal rights to Palestinians in '67 because of their own, I call it the demographic fear. They feared that they wanted to keep the number of Palestinians down so they could never, if they voted in a
Right.
democratic society, they would soon outnumber the Jews because
Right.
they had big families. And they couldn't do it. But, when I met other Palestinian educators and Faisal's mother, who's a nurse, and people do not vote for somebody just because of their religion or ethnicity.
No.
In this country, I have to say, I saw a lot of Jews who did not back Bernie Sanders.
Really?
Yes, the first viable Jewish American
Right,
candidate.
right, right.
They went with Hillary Clinton.
Oh,
I'm
my.
like, what? So people do not vote for somebody just because they're Jewish or not Jewish or whatever. I think it was an unfounded fear because there are a lot of, like people invested in atomic energy and bombs in
Oh,
Israel.
yes,
I
yes,
would have
yes.
more in common with like Jewish educators, Palestinian educators, or medical people, or scientists would have more in common with each other. It's very simplistic thinking to think you're going to vote for somebody
Right.
and take over the country in that way because you outnumber them.
Right.
People are much more complex than that. Let's give human beings a little more credit for being a little more complex. And you're Jewish. Oh, I'll vote for you. Oh, you're not Jewish. Oh, I'm not going to vote
Right,
for you.
right.
We don't do that, as Bernie Sanders knows so well.
So tell just a bit about the laudable stands that Bernie Sanders, who's a Jew, has taken in this country for years.
Well, Bernie Sanders, the greatest tradition of Judaism is social justice, and Bernie Sanders comes from the socialist strand of Judaism. And he hasn't changed at all, and he stands for human rights and social justice. And
Right.
somebody once said to me, "Oh, he doesn't flaunt his Jewishness." Well, no, he does not.
No.
Why should he?
That's right.
Why
That's
should
right.
he? He
That's
stands
right.
for social justice and what's right. And I was just at a meeting the other night. It was a study group, and there was a Hispanic woman there from Mexico, and somebody said something about the new president of Mexico who was Jewish. And she was like, "Oh yeah, in Mexico, they didn't
Not a big
even
deal.
no."
No.
Which really was like, I thought, wow, that's really interesting to me. In
Right.
Mexico, the fact that their president is Jewish
Right.
didn't even matter.
Right.
She was like, "Oh yeah, she's Jewish. Well, whatever."
Yeah, yeah. And so just a bit back to the 48 war, 500 Palestinian villages were wiped out, right? And 750,000 Palestinians were
Sent into Gaza. Now, Gaza is made up of a lot of the people who lost their homes and property in 1948. I mean, the population of Gaza grew immensely. And Gaza has been known since 1967, when it became under occupation after the Six-Day War, as an open-air prison.
right.
What's
right.
different about Gaza and the West Bank is that Gaza was completely surrounded, like that you couldn't get in or out. Their airport was destroyed, and I did get to go to Gaza, and I saw the airport.
When?
It was
I mean,
1998? I forget what year it was. And I saw it, and it was just beautiful. It was designed by an Egyptian architect. And when we went there, Israel never allowed the planes to take off. It never actually was
my.
functional. But, they have stories in Gaza because, who visited and saw the airport? Bill Clinton.
really?
Yeah. And they were so excited that he came.
Yeah.
It was like an honor, and they had such high hopes. The airport was a symbol of their new country, that they were going to have a, you know, a Palestinian country. And I remember going there, and the guards were soldiers, and they were like us, just asleep on their guns. And then we showed up. I was with a tour group sponsored by Neve Shalom Wahat Al Salam. It was the year I went with that group, and they saw us, and they woke up, and they didn't become soldiers. You know what they became? Docents in a museum. And they took us.
What's a docent?
A docent is someone who is like a tour guide in a museum, shows you around. So they took us into the main building that was someday would be where all the travelers were gonna, you know, beautiful airport. You know, like we love our beautiful airport and all the artwork in there and stuff. Well, they had that. It was just beautiful, beautiful Palestinian artwork, beautiful architecture. And it was bombed. Israel bombed it shortly after that. I forget what the excuse was or the
Oh, even
circumstance.
back then they bombed
Oh,
it.
yeah. So Gaza, but the thing about Gaza is that there were no checkpoints inside of Gaza.
Oh.
So if you were in Gaza, you could travel freely inside Gaza. This is after Ariel Sharon got rid of all the Israeli settlements. But you couldn't take a boat in, and it's on the coast. It's on the Mediterranean, no coast. Airport destroyed, you couldn't fly in. The only egress is a checkpoint with Israel, which is how I got into Gaza. I went through the crossing with Israel, and then there's one with Egypt. So that's why they call it an open-air prison, and it's even more intense now. But within Gaza, and one of the things that really shocked me when I was in Gaza, we were welcomed by the president of Al-Azhar University in Gaza City, who greeted us at a beautiful banquet table and served us coffee and tea and cookies and treated us like visiting dignitaries. And one of the things he said was the school was free. He said,
Really?
free, because we want to educate the young. That's all we have to offer is education. And he said, we have 99% levels of literacy. 99%. Now, okay, I'm a teacher, and I'm like, sure, okay. So after that, we invited some, our group invited some students, English majors, to come have lunch with us in a restaurant in Gaza City. And there I am in this beautiful restaurant in Gaza City with like mirrored walls and glasses.
Really?
It was just a beautiful, delicious food. And sitting next to me was this young man. And what are we talking about? Shakespeare and Thomas Hardy.
Oh, my.
In beautiful English.
Oh.
And I'm just like, oh my God, 99, I'm beginning to believe that was true.
Yes, yes.
And since then, I have worked with a group called We Are Not Numbers, WAN. And you could look that up. That's another amazing program.
We are not numbers.
Right, WANN, WAN. We Are Not Numbers. And it's young writers from Gaza who are trying to get their stories and experiences out into the world. And because the statistics of what's happening in Gaza are unfathomable, mind-boggling, and you can't get them.
Right.
So I have been working as a writing mentee with various writers in Gaza. And one of the things I really wanted to make sure I mentioned today is Michael Moore is co-producing an amazing film that's by some of these writers and other people who are documenting their experience and telling the human story beyond the statistics. This movie, From Ground Zero, is playing at the Guild this week, and Michael...
Now, which one?
From Ground Zero.
From Ground Zero.
Yeah.
And that's Michael Moore's?
That's the one that Michael Moore is the executive producer, because God bless him, he wants to make sure that people, and it's a collection of different stories by Palestinians living in Gaza, telling their stories of what it was like to be living there during this genocide. So it's a different format. I worked with writers telling their stories through print and stories, and this is through video. And I find video is just such a powerful medium.
Oh, it is. It
And
is.
I encourage everybody to go and see this movie this week. It's an incredible opportunity.
Right.
And right here at our wonderful theater, the Guild. And the schedule's up there, February 4th through 6th, Tuesday through Thursday, and there's 2 showings each day.
Good.
And so,
Well, I sure hope to see it.
and so that is going to describe in better words than I could ever offer what it's like going through what they've been going through
Exactly.
in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another movie which I just saw recently, and No Other Land, and you found out where that one's going to be playing. I saw this movie. I haven't seen the other one on Gaza, but this one left me speechless because it really.
That's the Guild as well.
Oh, that's at the Guild also. Okay, great. Thank you, Guild. What a resource in our community. What a gift to our community. But that one tells the story and a relationship between an Israeli journalist, 2 young men, and a Palestinian journalist trying to tell the story of what was happening in these villages called Masar, I was going to say Yarafat. I always forget exactly how to say it. But now this film takes place in the occupied West Bank. The other one takes place in Gaza. So this one is in the West Bank in these poor villages outside of Hebron. And how the people are struggling to survive. I was familiar with what was happening. Israel keeps condemning the villages to destruction.
Right.
And declaring it a military zone. And these people are living in caves and stone houses and depending on their animals to survive, and they're beautiful. And really, education is so important to them. In the movie, you see how the men try to build a school for their children. Education is invaluable in the Palestinian community. They highly value education. They totally believe in it, very much like Jewish people.
Right.
Very much. As a matter of fact, Palestinians used to be known as the Jews of the Middle East.
Really?
Yeah, because they value education. They don't necessarily have land.
Right.
And education is the one thing that can't be taken away from you. And they understand that.
Right.
And they were in diaspora. The Palestinians were in diaspora too, like the Jews.
Yes.
And there's a lot.
And explain diaspora.
Diaspora means they're spread across the world, not in their homeland. And there's a lot of historical evidence that points to the fact that Palestinians actually are the original Hebrews who never left the land of Canaan. They're the original Canaanites. Because when the Jews, where I grew up on this story, was sent into exile, into the diaspora, don't ask me what years, I'm not good on that, but in a source that I wouldn't have believed unless it was a Jewish source. It was a Jewish encyclopedia, and it said not all the people were sent into diaspora. This is when it was called the land of Canaan. The only people who went into diaspora is what we would now call the 1%, the propertied class, the moneyed class, the wealthy, the educated. The farmers, the blacksmith, the workers, all the people who make a place happen were not sent in diaspora. No conqueror is going to get rid of their farmers and the people who make a place happen. So they stayed, and they never left. And when the Muslims conquered the area, they converted. And I've spoken to a lot of Palestinians who know that their ancestors originally were Jewish or Hebrew. Sometimes they use the word Hebrew.
Really?
Yeah, which explains why it's hard to tell. Often Jews and Palestinians apart. It's not like in apartheid South Africa where it's like very stark, black and white. No, this is not like that at all. This is like we could say almost the same people,
Yeah.
cousins at the very least.
Yes. Yes.
You know, so it's a tragedy. And Faisal's village, where I lived with him for a while, was called Samua. And it was outside of Hebron. That's why I'm familiar with the Hebron Hills and where that other film takes place, Maser, Yar, I always forget how to say that. But I loved the village. I loved it. It was so beautiful. And what I loved about it was the simplicity of life, how everything was integrated. Everybody had a little home and surrounded by animals and gardens.
Well.
And I remember sitting in the garden, leaning back, picking grapes, or
Really?
harvesting
Oh.
watermelon. When Faisal and I got married, they slaughtered a sheep in our honor and held a feast for us.
Well.
And it was beautiful. It's not like that now. Now it's overcrowded and it's dealing with pollution, but that's what that's what it was like in '67, and that's when I fell in love with Samua.
Right.
That's what it was called.
In the United States, I think besides you, two of the major Jewish activists for decades on behalf of Palestinian human rights, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! And Noam Chomsky.
And Miko Peled.
Yes, and Miko Peled.
And another great one, who's not he was born in Minnesota, same hometown as Bob Dylan. He started ICAD, which is the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolition.
Ah, and his name?
It just flew out of my mind for a second.
I think I may have heard him speak here in Albuquerque.
Oh, he has.
Years ago.
He has been here, but he is always. And I hosted him in my home and met with him and visited there.
Is Bob Dylan Jewish?
Yeah, Robert Zimmerman.
Okay. Oh, that was his given name.
And actually, Bob Dylan went to his bar mitzvah. What's his? They're from the same hometown, Hibbings, Minnesota.
Huh.
Must be something in the water there.
Right, right. And tell when Amy Goodman Democracy Now! Is, I mean, I know, I don't have a TV, even though I have a TV program. I know and I hear her program many times, not every day, on KUNM, 89.9 FM, Monday through Friday, 4 to 5. And do you know when her program is on TV here?
Well, I just am able to watch it whenever I want. I just bring it up. I have.
Oh, I see.
I have the ability
but for
to
people
do that.
who have a TV,
She has like you can turn on Netflix. You could turn on Democracy Now! It's got its own label on the TV. You could just bring it up.
I remember, Iris, back in 1983, when I met David Mashney, a gay man whose father was Palestinian, and his family lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And David and I met at a gay nudist outdoor gathering in Ohio. And he and I went to hear the Palestine Human Rights Conference in Chicago, 1986. And the featured speaker at that Palestine Human Rights Conference was Noam Chomsky. So Noam Chomsky, for these many years, well, that's 38 years ago this past year, going on 39, has taken his strong stand as a Jew for the rights of Palestinian people.
Right. Well, when you are familiar with history, like, I consider myself like a bridge. I'm not Palestinian, I have Jewish background, but I don't see
Right.
a problem
Right.
with coexistence.
That's right.
And neither did my 108-year-old mother,
That's
who
right.
was kosher up till the day she died.
Really?
Oh, yeah, very kosher. I grew up in a very kosher home, and she didn't have a problem with it.
Wonderful.
She said, they're good people. I don't
Right.
have a problem having them as my neighbors.
Wonderful.
And I was just trying to find Jeff's, I can't think of his name. It'll come to me the minute this broadcast
right.
is over.
And
But it's the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions, and what he would do was bring Americans over to help rebuild homes that have been demolished of Palestinians by Caterpillar.
Right.
We're paying for all of
Right,
this.
right.
We're paying for what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah.
And so you'd go on cruise and rebuild somebody's home, knowing that it was a Sisyphean task, which means they would demolish it again. But it was almost symbolic, like, this is unacceptable that you are just keep demolishing
oh yes.
these homes.
Yes. Yes.
And now, you know, Gaza is now a wasteland.
Right.
And you know what's amazing about Gaza is, like, it was a very fertile place, with huge agricultural areas,
Really?
tomatoes, strawberries.
Oh my.
It was amazing, and I didn't realize it also, but it was also a home of some of the oldest churches. It was a huge Christian population there, as well as Muslim, as well as having the most unbelievable universities and places of learning. And it really, they really, really believed in educating people.
Right,
They really
right.
believed in literacy. And as a teacher, I so laud that. And now it's devastated.
Yeah.
It's rubble. And you know, I've heard from scientists and read that Gaza may not be livable for at least 80 years. If that's so, they have, before they can come up with an answer, they have to take samples, soil samples and water samples.
Oh my.
Before they can even determine how many years. And you know, we've all been very relieved because of the truce. And yes, what was happening, the bombs dropping and seeing all that
Yeah.
horror has just been hard on the whole world, I hope.
Yeah.
But the thing is, now, since that ceasefire, which feels very fragile, Israel has turned its attention to the West Bank.
Yes. Yes.
And now,
yes. Yes.
I was just reading today, there are 898 new checkpoints in the West Bank.
And describe what a checkpoint is like for
A
Palestinian
checkpoint
people.
means, like, if you want to go from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, which when I lived there before I was there before the occupation, you'd get on a bus and you'd be 20 minutes on the bus.
About how many miles between
I don't know, 20?
Jerusalem
25?
and Bethlehem?
Close, not that far. And so now there are checkpoints, and you have to go through. It said Bethlehem alone is surrounded by 89 iron gates,
Oh my.
which is like it's surrounded. And you know, like this year in Bethlehem, I think they were saying there's no Christmas in Bethlehem this year.
Right.
They were
exactly.
like locked up.
Exactly.
Bethlehem
exactly.
is locked up, and Bethlehem and Jerusalem are probably two of the most famous.
Oh yes. Yes. Yes.
And
yes.
so there's 173 new iron gates in Palestine, and it not only cuts off Palestinian cities from each other, but it cuts off Palestinian farmers
Right.
from being able to work on their land, harvest their olive trees, and doing all that. So the West Bank that I knew as a free and open place
Right.
where you could just go anywhere is just being destroyed. I mean, it's just heartbreaking
Oh,
because
yes,
it
it
was
is.
so beautiful, and open and free and pastoral and agricultural areas. And we would just hop on a bus and go from Jerusalem to Ramallah, which was where Faisal's mother lived. His parents were divorced. It was no big deal.
Right.
And now the biggest checkpoint is between Jerusalem and Ramallah, called Kalandia, which could take you hours to get through.
Hours for the checkpoint. Now,
it's like a cage, and it's like a narrow thing, and you have to walk through, and then there's cages, and then there's cameras and surveillance cameras. Actually, when we went into Gaza, when I went in with that delegation sponsored by the Oasis of Peace, our leader, our guide, was a Palestinian American. But he had a Palestinian name. Because he was a Palestinian, they separated him from us, and they wouldn't let him go through the checkpoint with us. He had to go through a separate one for Palestinians, and it took him a lot longer. So we had to wait on the other side of the checkpoint in Gaza, waiting for him, and we didn't know if he would get through, and he was the only one of us who could speak Arabic, and he's like, I want you to go and see what's happening in Gaza, even if I can't get in, and blah, blah. And we were like, no, we want you. They finally let him through, but he was separated from us for almost the whole day because he was Palestinian American. Right. And you know what his profession was? He worked with Sesame Street.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, my.
So the checkpoints are just horrific and frightening. Yeah. And like you couldn't go to see your neighbor if your family lived in another city, which was 20 minutes away. It would be like me trying to go to China or something.
Oh, my. And I understand there are some Israeli soldiers who, because of their conscience, say, we're not going to do it anymore to these Palestinian people. Do you know anything about those?
Yes, one of my best friends started that group.
And what are they called?
What it is, it's called Breaking the Silence. And it's Israeli soldiers who have done horrific things to Palestinian civilians, and their conscience can't handle it anymore, and they bear witness and write what they did in the name of securing Israeli civilians, because they want to make sure that their families and fellow citizens understand what's being done in their name.
Yes, and I've heard, and tell me if it's true, that many people in Israel don't see on the TVs the full evil and atrocities in Gaza. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if what they're showing on Israeli media. I can't speak to that, but I can say that there's no excuse for not knowing, because the Israeli army is a local army. Right. There's no family in Israel that doesn't have a connection to the army. Somebody in their family, a friend, a neighbor. I mean, it's a local army. It's an army of the nation. Every single person there has to go serve in the army. And my friend Mika, who's
male and female?
Male and female.
Really?
Yeah. Yes. And actually, even my friend, who's one of the founding members of Oasis of Peace, her son was in the Israeli army too.
Oh, my.
And her daughter too. I mean, everyone goes into the army.
Did they allow anyone, here during the Vietnam War?
Conscientious
I was
objectors?
a conscientious objector.
Well, the thing is, my friend whose son got killed, he was in the Israeli military, and it wasn't in a military action. It was two helicopters collided, and it was an accident, and her son was killed. Then when her daughter was in the army, they put the daughter in a position of non-combat, so she was like a teacher, taught English to Russian immigrants, Jews coming in from Russia. But it's hard to get conscientious objector that status.
It happens, or
it does,
but
it's not easy.
No.
And they also have a group, the Shimanistas, which are high school students who won't even, there's one thing about breaking the silence are soldiers bearing witness, and then there's others who are in high school who don't even want to go into the army. They don't want to partake
Right.
of the army. And I am shocked that there's not more Israeli soldiers who didn't refuse to partake of what was happening in Gaza. That is very troubling and worrisome to me, that there wasn't a greater movement in Israel. Forget what they're showing on the media. These are all young soldiers.
That's right. That's right.
Who are doing the actions. Who
That's right.
are telling their families and back home and their girlfriends and sisters what they're doing and what's happening.
Right.
So,
And I've heard that some, not all, but Israeli soldiers joke with each other about shooting Palestinian kids. I mean, horrific.
that is speaking to a loss of humanity. That's
right.
very, very, very
That's
sad.
right.
And
Yeah.
that's what I think we all need to keep our eyes on, is the humanity of everybody there. There will never be security for Israelis
Right.
unless there is justice for Palestinians.
What do you urge people who give a damn here to do on behalf of the situation?
For one thing, you need to be informed, and you need to know history, and you need to know the entire history, not just, I grew up on a particular version of it.
Right.
I've been researching and really learning
Right.
about history
Right.
for a long time. You could read my book,
Right.
Unexpected Bride in the Promised Land. It's
Is it in the library here?
I don't know, but you could get it on Barnes & Noble, you could get it on Amazon, and it's also as an ebook. And another book is The Lemon Tree, which also is a very personal story about an Israeli family who tries to give back the home to a Palestinian family who lost their home in
Oh, my.
1948. And that one's called The Lemon Tree, and I love that book also.
Oh, yes, The Lemon Tree.
And also Miko Peled's book, The General's Son, which is another wonderful book that documents the history there. You get informed, and then inform your friends and family and relatives, and then go talk to your congressional representatives
Yes.
and say, not in our name, we do not want to pay for
Right.
all this destruction
And
of
I've
weapons.
called over the months many, many times to our Congress people, all 5, in D.C. and the 4 that I can reach here locally, because our landline phone has no long-distance carrier to make long-distance calls, but I have a toll-free number for D.C. And I, as some of my viewers may know, I have paid no federal income tax, not one damn bloody penny, for 46 years, and I never, never will. And I thank you for watching, and I thank so much my wonderful guest, Iris Keltz. It's been so enlightening, and for pouring your heart, your life into this cause for the justice of human beings.
And thank you. Thank you for hearing this story and for honoring it.
Good.
Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone. Taste the wind, don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love, let the music get you high, and when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine on. And when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine on.